Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In this video, we explore a controversial and fascinating theory, the existence of Great Tartaria, a vast, advanced civilization allegedly erased from official history. From literary references and ancient maps to hidden technologies and unexplained architectural patterns, we follow Cracmal's analysis through centuries of forgotten narratives, geopolitical intrigue, and alternative interpretations of the past. Was Tartaria truly the greatest empire the world has ever seen? And if so, why was it erased? Cracmal's analysis begins with a sweeping historical and geopolitical premise. The war currently being fought in Ukraine between Russia and the British Western Bloc is by no means an isolated, present-day event. Rather, it encapsulates within itself all preceding conflicts, starting with the Crimean War and even the so-called American Revolution. From this perspective, interpreting contemporary events necessarily requires a deep understanding of historical dynamics that stretch back centuries, dynamics that official historiography has systematically obscured. According to Cracmal, conventional geopolitical analysts merely rally their respective camps without grasping the overarching design that connects events seemingly distant in time and space. One of the main reasons for this analytical blindness is ignorance of Tartaria. Without understanding the history of this vast empire, it becomes virtually impossible to correctly interpret the period between the late 18th and early 20th centuries, an era marked by a series of revolutions erupting across the globe with a frequency and coordination that can hardly be considered accidental. If these revolutions are viewed not as separate and independent episodes, but as different phases of a single historical process, a coherent pattern emerges, one whose principal beneficiary was the British Empire. During that period, well-established methods of information warfare were supplemented by even more sophisticated tactics, aimed at weakening states from within through so-called fifth columns. It is essentially the same operational model still employed today under the label of color revolutions, as evidenced, in this view, by recent developments in Iran. Cracmal lists a series of historical events that appear unrelated but, when reinterpreted systemically, reveal a common direction. The Boxer Rebellion in China, the Boer War in southern Africa, the Anglo-American War, the British expedition to Tibet, the partition of Bengal, the Philippine-American War, and the Venezuelan Civil War, during which even the Italian Navy took part in the blockade of Venezuela. These military episodes are accompanied by a striking series of political assassinations. King Umberto I of Italy, U.S. President McKinley, Finnish Governor-General Bobrikov, King Carlos I of Portugal, and Japanese Prime Minister at Hiroshima were all eliminated within a relatively short span of time. The picture is completed by considering the two great invasions of Russia, that of Napoleon, armed and supported by Great Britain, and that of Hitler, likewise financed and encouraged, according to Cracmal, by British interests, both sharing the same strategic objective of subduing Russian power and seizing its immense territory. Neither, however, succeeded. None of these events, therefore, should be seen as isolated. Rather, they stem directly from the dissolution of Tartaria and from Britain's ambition to appropriate its legacy, that of the largest empire the world has ever known. India, America, South Africa, and Australia had already fallen within the British sphere, but one crucial piece remained under Russian control. To address this, Tsar Alexander I Romanov, related to the British royal family and to most of Europe's ruling dynasties, initially reached an agreement with Napoleon for the final defeat and partition of Tartaria. However, upon finding himself heir to an immense empire, he changed course and resisted the dominance the British sought to impose on him. At the same time, the Tsar agreed on the need to erase the memory of the Tartar Empire from history. The Romanovs conquered Tartaria, renamed their new territories the Russian Empire, effectively extending the name Russia to the conquered lands, and thus became the legal heirs of Great Tartaria, while simultaneously turning into a primary target of the expansionist ambitions of the poorer, yet more aggressive British Empire. The speed with which the Russians colonized Siberia deeply alarmed the British, who harbored similar ambitions for those territories and believed they could do in the Far East what they had done in North America: annex it to their empire by exploiting local populations and natural resources. For this reason, they led coalitions against Russia on multiple fronts simultaneously: Crimea, the Caucasus, the Baltic, and the Pacific Ocean, in an effort to contain Russian expansion in every direction. Meanwhile, the Romanovs progressively occupied the now largely depopulated territories of Siberia, systematically attempting to erase every trace of Tartaria: place names, documents, monuments, traditions. The operation was so effective that the populations currently living in those regions have completely forgotten its existence. Yet despite this vast campaign of erasure and the ensuing conspiracy of silence, the documents and testimonies concerning Tartaria, an empire that, only 250 years ago, was allegedly the largest in the world, have, according to Cracmal, become an unstoppable avalanche. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it has finally become possible to restore certain truths, beginning with the attempt to conflate the Tartars with the Crimean Tatars, two entities that are, historically and culturally, profoundly distinct. Unfortunately, even maps fail to provide all the answers, bringing the discussion back to the very nature of historical time. It remains unclear precisely when Tartaria replaced Scythia and Sarmatia, why those territories changed names, how populations were replaced, and where the new inhabitants came from. In every country, Cracmal observes, minorities tend to preserve the memory of their past more effectively, such as the Kurds, the Basques, the Boers, and other persecuted peoples. And perhaps this is precisely why they are persecuted. They safeguard inconvenient truths. Even today, the majority of those fighting in Ukraine are said to be Eastern Russians rather than Muscovites, a detail that, in this framework, is far from insignificant. One of the most troubling issues concerns the construction of similar or identical buildings across the world, made from the same materials, without any clear understanding of where those materials came from or how they were transported. These structures are real and visible to all, yet explaining their uniform global distribution seems to push the discussion into metaphysical territory. Here Cracmal opens a parenthesis already touched upon in relation to cathedrals. Just as buildings are physical bodies whose origins elude conventional understanding, human beings too appear to possess embedded codes that render them, at least in part, biorobots programmed by unknown forces and intelligences. As further evidence, Cracmal points to the ability to mobilize large armies seemingly out of nowhere. Napoleon's 400,000 soldiers provide a historical example, while today there is talk of recruiting 800,000 troops for Ukraine, raising the legitimate question of where they will come from. The same mechanism, he suggests, applies to ethnic groups. Entire populations seem to appear and give rise to new civilizations, almost as if predefined logical structures already existed. with fully formed languages and structured cultures, ready to activate and produce specific outcomes at specific historical moments. Official history maintains that civilizations develop gradually and slowly, but Cracmal argues that events may have unfolded very differently, as though their development had been prearranged in advance. Cracmal maintains that there is no doubt that in the 18th century Great Tartaria existed and was widely known throughout Europe and beyond. Explicit references can be found in Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. The narrator recounts how, driven by a powerful west-southwesterly wind, his ship is carried some 500 leagues eastward into waters unknown even to the most experienced sailors. Choosing to avoid the northwestern regions of Great Tartaria, the captain decides to continue straight ahead. In the second novel of Robinson Crusoe, a sequel unfamiliar to most readers, the protagonist is said to have spent 11 years in the service of Great Tartaria. Literary references do not end there. Giacomo Puccini sets Turandot in Tartaria, with the heroine's father as king of that land. In Frankenstein, Mary Shelley has Dr. Frankenstein pursue his creature across the wild expanses of Tartaria. Charles Dickens, in Great Expectations, likens the heroine to a Tartar for her fiery temperament. The Encyclopedia Britannica, in its first edition, Volume 3, printed in Edinburgh in 1771, describes Great Tartaria as an immense country in northern Asia extending as far as Tibet, treating it as an established and well-known geographical and political reality. Further evidence includes naval flags of Tartaria reproduced in the Atlas of the Flags of All Nations, Religions and Races of the World, published by Schomburg and Company in 1865. Even the British Royal Navy long used the name Tartar for its ships, a tradition dating back to June 1776 and continuing up to a cruiser that played a prominent role in the landings in Sicily and Salerno during the Second World War. According to this interpretation, the reason why Tartaria is still being erased despite such documentation is the same reason the history of Russia is distorted. Western powers have no need for a Eurasian civilization, as it would obstruct the construction of a new world order and undermine the narrative that beyond Europe there lies only barbarism and wilderness. In the mid-19th century, European capitals were captivated by a brilliant Russian aristocrat whose fame spread through the most exclusive salons, Varvara Dmitrievna Rimsky-Korsakova. This noblewoman from Kostroma, the wife of a high-ranking officer, is described by Prince Dmitry Dmitrievich Dolgorukov in his memoirs as the greatest beauty of the 19th century. Her beauty and wit even aroused the envy of Empress Eugenie, wife of Napoleon III, a telling indication of the power of her allure in the Europe of the time. Her celebrated oil portrait, titled The Venus of Tartaria and painted by Franz Xaver Winterhalter, is now housed at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and remains one of the most evocative testimonies to the link between the Tartar legacy and 19th century European culture. The Countess also inspired other artistic works. The melody Souvenir de Biarritz was composed especially for her by Emil Waldteufel. She died young, at just 45. Figures such as Countess Rimsky-Korsakova were therefore vividly remembered in 19th century Paris, and already in the previous century, it was widely known across Europe that the empire referred to in the West as Great Tartaria had existed for many millennia as the most advanced and developed civilization on Earth, a power that exerted its influence not through coercion, but by sharing its technological achievements with the peoples it encountered. Alternative historians argue that the Tartarians, through extraordinarily complex engineering, sophisticated architecture, and advanced technology, transformed the Earth into a kind of etheric power grid, something akin to a circuit board, much as a prior civilization had done with pyramids and temples distributed across the globe. Tartar builders are said to have used an artificially created material comparable to modern red bricks, with which they constructed both private residences and monumental public structures. One of their principal innovations is described as a form of polymer concrete that acquires near-eternal durability, making it extremely difficult even today to determine the precise construction period of these buildings. Conventional dating methods become unreliable because the material does not degrade as expected. The roofs of such structures are said to function as electrical antennas, connected to reinforcing bars integrated into the load-bearing framework. Obelisks and domes allegedly served as power stations for the transmission of clean, free, wireless energy across vast distances, requiring no wired infrastructure. Street lamps and domestic lighting fixtures were purportedly made from a special type of quartz crystal, interacting with an etheric current through substances such as mercury, or activated by the sound of bells capable of triggering resonators within electrical circuits. These systems were later deliberately deactivated, and many structures were adorned with religious symbols to conceal their original function. At the same time, figures such as Thomas Edison were, in this view, effectively constructed to be presented as the inventors of electricity, paving the way for profit-driven energy companies to replace what had once been free and universally accessible energy. The fundamental question remains: why did such a vast and powerful state disappear from the political map, and why has it no longer been mentioned in history books and encyclopedias since the 19th century, as though it had never existed? Various researchers propose different explanations. Some attribute its disappearance to internal wars, political intrigue, and dynastic crises, though certainty is impossible given the scarcity of reliable documentation. More radical hypotheses have also been put forward: a natural catastrophe of immense scale, or even an atomic-style bombardment. One extreme theory suggests that massive explosions triggered a vast firestorm in Siberia, engulfing the entire region, effectively a thermonuclear war in the early 19th century, leading to a nuclear winter in 1816, historically known as the Year Without a Summer, when global temperatures dropped and harvests failed worldwide. In support of this idea, the Tunguska explosion is often cited, its blinding flash reportedly visible as far away as London. The subsequent appearance of numerous circular lakes and craters in the region is said to lack a fully satisfactory conventional geological explanation. In the aftermath of such devastation, cities would have been abandoned and vast fires destroyed palaces and buildings of immense value. The reclamation of these deserted lands is thought to have begun only some 50 years later, when modern structures were built upon the foundations of the old. It is highly likely, Cracmal suggests, that in those years a deliberate decision was made to bury not only the physical remains, but also the technologies and knowledge relating to the very structure of the world that had previously been in use. The fact that churches still burn today, such as the one in Amsterdam, is interpreted as an attempt to eliminate architectural or documentary evidence pointing to a radically different history from the official one. Cracmal himself advances a different hypothesis: a colossal flood that buried entire continents beneath a layer of mud 10 to 20 meters deep, varying according to elevation above sea level. This event, he suggests, may have occurred in the mid to late 18th century, at a time when Africa was still a lush region with active rivers and lakes, and before Napoleon's arrival, when the Sphinx was already found partially buried under accumulated sand and mud. The question of Tartaria's origins remains unresolved and inevitably leads into unusual and controversial interpretive territory. Its appearance seems to have been sudden, and some researchers therefore offer an esoteric reading. It is not known precisely where these new inhabitants came from, how Scythia and Sarmatia were replaced by Tartaria, or how these peoples arrived already equipped with a fully formed language and a structured culture. Tartaria is said to have arisen in Siberia around 5,000 years ago, when a large group of people settled near what is now the city of Tomsk, building a settlement along the riverbanks. The name itself is thought to derive from the deities Tark and Terra, children of the thunder god Purin. These people are not portrayed as primitive or uncivilized. On the contrary, they already possess extensive knowledge of construction, social organization, and advanced technologies, and within a few years they establish a settlement of considerable size and complexity. The Siberian climate at that time is also described as radically different from today's, summer temperatures reaching 40 degrees Celsius, winters rarely dropping below freezing, little snow, rivers teeming with fish, and fertile land capable of supporting a wide range of plant life. making Siberia a highly habitable and productive region. The arrival of these people, referred to by some esoterically inclined researchers as operators of light, is said to mirror what occurs simultaneously in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Individuals from unknown origins rapidly give rise to highly developed civilizations. Cracmal argues that these people do not belong to the world in which they appear. They arrive already as adults, intellectually and technically formed, fully aware of their mission, to give rise to modern humanity in its current form. References are made to possible Hyperborean or Atlantean origins, though it is acknowledged that such hypotheses merely shift the problem rather than resolve it, since one must then ask where those ancestral civilizations themselves came from. Cracmal challenges several established narratives regarding the physical appearance of historical elites. Egyptian pharaohs, often depicted as Arab, are in many cases mummies of individuals with Caucasian features, according to available scientific analyses. The Great Mongol Khans do not necessarily correspond to the conventional Asian image attributed to them. Consequently, Great Tartaria is described not as being ruled by Mongols or Asians, but by people of fully modern European appearance. Tamerlane himself is portrayed in contemporary sources as having fair skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, despite being a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. He adds a number of striking historical curiosities. Marco Polo, describing the court of the Great Khan, recounts how his sages used sorcery and enchantments to disperse clouds and ensure fair weather around the imperial palace while storms raged in the surrounding areas, possibly a veiled reference to now unknown weather control technologies. Some accounts from merchants and foreign guests at the court of Ivan the Terrible mention an Iron Man, a mechanical servant of extraordinary capability. The merchant Johann Wem writes in his diaries that this automaton defeated the Tsar's bear in combat, wounding it and driving it away. When guests expressed doubt, the Tsar reportedly had hidden panels beneath the figure's clothing opened, revealing gears and springs that moved its arms, legs, and head, a documented example of a kind of medieval robot. Cracmal concludes with a reflection on identity that remains highly relevant today. Russians continue to ask themselves who they truly are, Russians or Tartarians. Modern Russians are, in all likelihood, to a large extent direct descendants of the inhabitants of Tartaria. They appear visibly different from Western Slavs, such as Czechs and Poles, both in physical traits and in deeper cultural character. The beauty of Russian women, often attributed to European origins, may instead have far older and more distant Tartar roots. Thus, while Great Tartaria has been erased from official history, the questions surrounding its true nature, its sudden emergence, and its equally sudden disappearance from the world map remain open and increasingly difficult to ignore. That's all for today. See you in the next episode of The Gentle Art of Doubting, here on Compelling Topics.
I went to